One word, that's all the serpent changed in Genesis chapter 3. Not an outright lie, a subtle twist of what God actually said. And that single tactic sets off a pattern of deception that repeats across the entire Bible. Sons disguise themselves to steal blessings. Kings fabricate divine approval. A disciple betrays his teacher with a kiss. The same blueprint, recycled across thousands of years. And it always starts smaller than you'd expect. A single question. That's how the pattern begins. In Genesis chapter 3, the serpent is described with the Hebrew word arum, more crafty than any other creature. In the ancient Near East, serpents symbolized both wisdom and danger, guardians of hidden knowledge and also agents of chaos. The serpent's opening move is not a direct lie. Instead, it reframes the command. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? The words are almost right, but not quite. A slight shift. The original instruction was clear. One tree was off limits. The serpent's version makes the restriction sound total, unreasonable, even arbitrary. Eve answers, repeating most of what she remembers, but she adds that even touching the tree will bring death. The serpent presses further. "You will not certainly die," it insists, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." This is the blueprint, a leading question, a small distortion, and a promise that the forbidden path leads to wisdom. In the original Hebrew, the serpent's language is precise and pointed. It plants doubt about what God actually said, then offers a new interpretation that feels empowering. The result is a cascade, one subtle twist setting everything else in motion. The story that follows will show this pattern repeating, but it all starts here, with a single word turned sideways. Jacob stands in the dim light of his father's tent, goatskins strapped to his arms, wearing Esau's best clothes. Isaac, nearly blind, reaches out and feels the rough hair, inhales the scent of the fields, and pronounces the blessing meant for his firstborn. Genesis 27 verses 1 through 29 record each detail: the whispered plot between Rebekah and Jacob, the savory meal, the trembling hands. The disguise is more than a costume. It is a calculated use of Isaac's failing senses and the ancient custom of primogeniture, where one word from the patriarch determines the family's future. The pattern does not stop with Jacob. Years later, at another threshold, Laban waits for his nephew to finish 7 years of labor for Rachel. On the wedding night, Laban sends in Leah instead. Genesis 29 verses 23 through 27 describes the switch as a matter of custom, saying it is not our practice to give the younger before the firstborn, but the darkness and veils do the work. Jacob, once the deceiver, becomes the deceived. The bride price, a standard in ancient marriage contracts, is now a bargaining chip for another 7 years of service. The cycle reaches a new level with Joseph's brothers. Jealous of the favored son, they strip Joseph of his multicolored robe, dip it in goat's blood, and hand it to their father. Genesis 37 verses 31 through 33 shows the brothers offering the garment as proof, letting Jacob draw his own conclusion that a wild animal has devoured him. Here, the evidence is staged, the story left unspoken. The blood-stained coat, like the goatskins before it, stands in for the truth. Across these stories, deception shifts shape, identity is hidden, evidence is fabricated, and customs are twisted to justify the outcome. Each generation inherits not just the blessing, but the tactics of disguise and misdirection. What began as a single question in Eden now echoes through family rituals, turning kin against kin and leaving wounds that will take years to mend. Pharaoh's negotiations with Moses unfold as a series of broken promises. Each time a plague strikes Egypt, Pharaoh relents and then withdraws his consent once the threat fades. The phrase "Pharaoh hardened his heart" recurs throughout Exodus, evidence of a ruler who uses his own word as a bargaining chip. This pattern mirrors ancient Near Eastern treaty practices, where kings often inserted escape clauses and reserved the right to reinterpret agreements. Pharaoh's shifting stance is less about stubbornness and more about calculated control, using diplomacy to delay and manipulate. The result is a cycle of trust and betrayal, exposing both Israel's vulnerability and Egypt's fear of losing power. Centuries later, deception takes a new form in Canaan. The Gibeonite chiefs, described in Joshua chapter 9, verses 3 through 15, arrive disguised as distant travelers, with their sacks torn and their bread moldy. They plead for a treaty, and Israel's leaders, relying on appearances, swear an oath. Only afterward do they discover the ruse. The text calls it by deception. Here, the rituals of covenant, oaths, and ceremonial acts become tools for survival. Both episodes reveal how leaders weaponize ambiguity, turning the machinery of statecraft into instruments of fraud. Samson's downfall begins not on the battlefield, but in the quiet space of intimacy. Judges chapter 16 describes Delilah's repeated questions, each a lure to expose the secret of his strength. Her words, gentle at first, become insistent. As Judges chapter 16 verse 15 records, Delilah asks how he can say, "I love you," when his heart is not with her. Each answer Samson gives is a half-truth, a test of loyalty and trust. But the cycle wears him down. When he finally reveals the truth, his uncut hair as the sign of his vow, Delilah calls in the Philistine rulers. They shave his head as he sleeps, and his strength leaves him. Judges chapter 16 verse 21 records the price. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Deception here is not brute force, but the slow erosion of boundaries through desire and misplaced trust. In the royal court, Saul faces a different test. Under pressure in 1 Samuel chapter 13, he offers a sacrifice himself, ignoring Samuel's instructions, and then he justifies his actions to the prophet. Later, in 1 Samuel chapter 15, Saul spares King Agag and the best livestock, claiming it was for worship. When confronted, he insists he obeyed, but Samuel's words cut through the self-deception. To obey is better than sacrifice, as 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 22 records. Saul's rhetoric frames his choices as service, but the text exposes a leader hiding disobedience behind religious language. In both stories, the real danger is not just being deceived by others, but the way fear, desire, and pride open the door to self-justification. The Bible's pattern is clear. Deception takes root where leaders are most vulnerable, whether in the arms of a lover or the spotlight of power. Ahab, king of Israel, sits before 400 prophets. The question is direct. Should he attack Ramoth-Gilead? Every prophet agrees. They tell him to go, and victory is certain. Their voices blend into one, offering the king the reassurance he craves. These are not strangers. They are court prophets, fluent in the language of divine approval, trained to keep the king's confidence intact and his plans blessed. But one seat remains empty. Micaiah, known for his honesty, is summoned at Ahab's reluctant request. The king admits he hates Micaiah for never prophesying good news. When Micaiah arrives, he first mimics the crowd, then breaks away and says, "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd." His vision is not triumph, but disaster. He describes a heavenly court where a spirit volunteers to deceive the prophets, luring Ahab to his doom. The real danger is not just a wrong prediction, but the comfort of spiritual flattery. The prophets give Ahab what he wants, masking ambition as revelation. Micaiah stands alone, exposing how easily divine authority can be faked. He is thrown in prison, while Ahab marches to his death, undone by voices he trusted. Judah slips away from the meal, counting out his price with the temple authorities. 30 pieces of silver, the sum set in Matthew 26, verses 14 to 16. In the world of first-century Jerusalem, 30 silver coins could buy a slave's life, a small but loaded figure for betrayal. The deal is sealed not with violence, but with a kiss. As Jesus stands trial, the authorities search for testimony that will stick. Matthew 26, verses 60 to 61, describes false witnesses stepping forward, twisting words about destroying the temple and razing it in 3 days. The courtroom becomes a stage for rehearsed accusations, echoing the tactics that have surfaced throughout the story. Betrayal, now transactional and public, is dressed up as justice. In the background, the claim remains, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," words attributed to Jesus in John 14, verse 6, standing in stark contrast to the machinery of deception closing in around him. In the early days of the Jesus movement, the story of Ananias and Sapphira in Acts chapter 5 stands as a stark reminder that the pattern of deception did not end with the resurrection. The couple sells a piece of property and brings part of the proceeds to the apostles, while claiming it is the full amount. Their act is not just a private scheme. It is a calculated attempt to appear generous within a community built on radical honesty. Peter confronts Ananias, saying, "You have not lied just to human beings, but to God." Both Ananias and Sapphira fall dead in turn, and fear seizes the whole church. The text calls this lying to the Spirit, showing that even in a community shaped by new hope, the old pattern resurfaces, deception cloaked in religious devotion, with consequences that ripple far beyond the individual. Deception rarely shouts, it whispers, adapts, and thrives wherever truth grows thin. Across history and into every institution, its forms persist, shaping choices, dividing communities, even shaping faith. The real test isn't spotting deception once, but cultivating the vigilance and humility to confront it every time it returns.